Now let's get to here's a submission that's out of whack with everyone else who's been doing it. Here's a pro submission to the bill. So let's kick it off.
And if there is time left, there might be questions from members. Thank you.
Certainly. Look, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I realise it's 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon, so I'll try and keep it short and sweet. Echelon, we are an energy company based in Wellington. We produce hydrocarbons in New Zealand, Australia and Indonesia. I've personally got a degree in petroleum engineering, one in mechanical engineering, and I've also got a degree in business, and I've worked in the oil and gas business for 35 years around the world. On an overarching point, few countries have more renewable electricity in their system than New Zealand. We actually punch well above our weight, and that heavy lifting was done in the 50s, 60s and 70s through hydro and geothermal. Of the countries that have about the same levels of renewable as us, Brazil, Denmark and Norway stand out. All of them have vibrant, export-oriented oil and gas businesses. Our submission looks at the arguments for Indigenous energy production in terms of security, cost and climate. On security, I think you just need to read the paper today and see what a problem it would be to rely on others for energy, not when it's here for the finding. Wind and solar dominate the renewable growth plans, and for reliability, they just simply need to be backed up. In the submission, we run through the logic. It demonstrates that the only currently viable and cost-effective backup is gas peakers, and that's exactly what we do for a 43% solar-powered Alice Springs with our Dingo gas field. The sun goes down, a battery holds the grid for about 5 minutes. That's what batteries are good for. And gas engines come on to power the grid. Cost matters. New Zealanders need to have a constant supply of energy, but they've also got to be able to afford it. As well as the simple fuel costs, importing energy has a bunch of hidden costs. Imports have to be paid for, and that damages our already negative balance of payments. Taxes and royalties will get paid elsewhere. New Zealanders are going to lose the opportunity to have high-paying, high-tech jobs of all sorts here at home. And finally, the hydrocarbon extraction industry is the world's most productive industry, and a country's productivity determines its standard of living. So if you've got lower productivity, that means you're going to be less well-educated, you're going to be poorer, and you're going to be sicker. Finally, there is no gain for the climate in turning our back on Indigenous resources. We actually use 100,000 barrels a day of oil in New Zealand today. I'm sure Mr. Abel and Ms. Schwabrick will say that the world has discovered enough oil, no need for any more. What they probably won't say is that 3/4 of that discovered oil is in bitumens and oil sands. Those are environmentally harmful and highly energy intensive to mine and process. Offshore fields like the ones we have in New Zealand have a far, far smaller environmental footprint, and they consume far, far less energy to produce per unit of energy. So that's less CO2 per unit of energy. If you look at importing gas, then I challenge you to do the maths. Burning imported LNG is about the same or worse than burning Indonesian coal. And I can assure you we are burning Indonesian coal in New Zealand. We were doing it yesterday. We don't happen to be doing it right at this minute. I just checked. So it requires producing, compressing, liquefying, storing, transporting, storing again, then regasifying. About 25% of the gas is burnt on its way to the user. So that's all ends up as CO2 in the atmosphere, and we do share an atmosphere. It doesn't matter where the CO2 is produced. So we would say that reversing the politically motivated changes that were made previously will begin to restore the trust that's needed to bring investors, to bring capital back into New Zealand. I would also draw your attention to the Energy Resources Aotearoa submission. That has some specific policy recommendations which will further rebuild that trust. And then we can see if New Zealand can use our stores of ancient solar power, because that is what hydrocarbons are, to help ourselves in the world as we navigate the transition. Yeah, it is a transition, not a hard stop. And that is why gas, I believe, is a three-letter word for transition. So thank you, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Andrew, and we'll go to Steve Abel first.
Yeah, wow. This is an interesting submission, Andrew. Thank you. I just want to clarify a couple of things that we do agree with you on. LNG is more carbon intensive than coal, and that is something that this government is proposing to bring in. So they're going to bring in one of the most carbon polluting options there is, compressed, liquid natural gas. And also your point that, what was the other point you made that I did agree with for a brief moment? I wanted to ask you a question that you talk about these actions being driven by ideology, not science. What strikes me is that your position is driven by ideology, not science, insofar as you're denying the science of climate change, which very clearly says we need to stop burning all fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. And furthermore,
Steve Abel, I just asked you to ask a question.
My question is, do you
if you don't agree with the submitter, doesn't mean you start making political statements. Can you ask a question?
Yes. Do you disagree with the position of the International Energy Agency, which says that we have to have no new exploration or extraction of oil, gas, and coal by 2021 if we are to achieve climate targets? That's the International Energy Agency who say that.
Yeah, that certainly is. And if they mean that we've got to burn bitumen and oil and dig up oil...
They don't mean that, and you know it.
Well, what reserves are they talking about? Because they also include oil in their forecast.
Yeah, they're saying we need to have no new exploration or extraction of new oil, gas, and coal by 2021.
Well, that only leaves you with the stuff that we've found, and that if they've got oil in their forward forecasts, it doesn't gel. So, look, I agree with you completely. We have a transition that we've got to make, and we've got to navigate that transition, and you've got to do it according to the laws of thermodynamics and physics.
And my follow-up
there is no way around it. So our position is actually that there is no, in terms of New Zealand's production of indigenous fuels to fuel New Zealand, it just doesn't make sense from a climate perspective to be importing those.
My follow-up is that you say cheap energy underpins New Zealand's standard of living. Do you acknowledge that what makes the energy expensive is the fossil fuel component? It is under our spot marketing system, the gas and the coal, that drives up the cost of the energy, because the cheapest forms of energy in this country are the renewable forms.
On what basis?
I mean, are you saying that hydro
is that on the basis
not...
of LCOE, levelized cost of energy?
You understand how the spot market works?
I do. So yes.
That you accept that the cheapest form of electricity in this country is that generated by hydro?
Correct, as long as it's built, constructed hydro.
This is a line from you. You say energy underpins New Zealand's standard of living.
Finish the answer before you, if you have a supplementary, you put it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. So I will go to Helen White now.
Thank you. I'd like to know your position on whether you think that companies that take out fossil fuels, mine, should actually be restoring the situation rather than, at the moment we have a bond so that there is a guarantee that they'll be restored. Do you think it's acceptable when we have situations where in fact companies go under or sell to another company and then it goes under, and the New Zealand taxpayer ends up paying that price?
I think that's, what the legal position at the moment reflects.
The change proposed here is that, in fact, that won't happen anymore. There will be no bond. And so companies will be able to do what they have done in the past, which is sell to another company, and then that company goes under, and the New Zealand taxpayers had to fork out millions of dollars as a consequence. Do you expect that you have a duty to clean up your mess?
Indeed, I think all companies have a duty, have a need to clean up, clean up any impact that they've had. I do believe that the current proposals are don't remove the financial hurdles that are required to be proved, before anybody gets involved. So,
do you accept we're going back to the position that we were in the law when we had a disaster of this kind, and the New Zealand taxpayer has had to pay $434 million because of it?
I believe that the changes that were made will remain that require companies to be financially able to fulfil their decommissioning costs.
Would you accept
Which
we
was
can't
not the
afford to
case.
go
Which
back?
was not
I'll
the
have
case
to
before.
stop that.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for your submission. Thank you for answering.
I have a question based on that. Are they reversing legislation that means that oil companies have to have the means to be able to clean up their own mess? Is that what National's looking at doing? Because that's really bad if that's the case.
Well, I mean, the point is that I could answer that in the sense that the mess is actually an exception rather than the rule. I mean,
But $430 million in cleanup.
all oil and gas exploration systems, right? They have built-in safety systems, and it's those who do not comply with them in shoddiness and irresponsibility, then they have to do the cleanup. Again, it's that one bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch apples rule.
I know, but this is why it's important to put legislation in so we can prevent more apples from rotting.
Exactly, agree with that. But then the point is that you have so much regulations, right? That you stifle even the equipment. I mean, I can imagine Sam looking into this machine, is it made from tungsten steel? Or, I mean, you can create hundreds of bureaucratic procedures, and by the time the German investor brings that machine over, it's all right. We have lost $3 million. Thanks to Sam.
Now here's something that Tawhiri brought up. So Christchurch earthquake, liquefaction. The petrol stations that had the backup generators, you couldn't enter the site of the petrol station because of the live electricity with the water, because the backup, every time you cut the mains power off, the backup generator kicked on.
I have really got to talk about the TUI project. I think that's really important because they're still here in New Zealand. They're just trading under a different name now, Matahio. They've still got the same executives and people like that involved in that company. They recently tried to apply for a $38 million tax rebate. That's on top of $330 million it's costing the taxpayer to clean up after them.
Are they using that $38 million rebate for further mining explorations to create jobs, or
They haven't stated what they're going to use it for.
right.
So it could be getting paid as dividends to their shareholders.
Yes.
Okay.
Which means it doesn't create jobs.
Well, we have to evaluate that further. I mean, again, it's a good point that you brought up, and I think I agree with your point of view in the sense that we really do have to have all these safety catches in place. I mean, we don't want to have oil dripping off everywhere in the coast and these poor penguins dying and all that. But we kind of go and then make a generalization, right? I mean, we can agree with that, or we can disagree, but we can also agree with the fact that we can't make a generalization to say, oops, as a result of all oil, gas exploration companies, including Shell, Esso, our British counterparts who wants to put money in, or Aussie Gas, they are all having this very bad. If so, I think all of them will be sacked. There'll be no more.
Yeah, I mean, you are correct when you say that not all the oil companies are doing this. I don't know about the gentleman that just spoke before, but I do know about this company that has 6 permits in the Taranaki Basin. They can still drill even after doing all of that, even with the legislation in place. And that's really bad. They shouldn't be allowed to continue in New Zealand. They're bad business people.
You're talking about the TUI people, the TUI owners.
Yeah, Tamarind, yes.
And is there any real evidential side of what Helen White said of 430 million, which we Kiwis had to fork out through the tax to pay for it, or did the TUI paid some for it? I mean,
I got that information from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment.
Right. which was created by the previous Labour government. I mean,
No,
Hold
MB
on
was
a
not
minute.
created
They're
by the previous
independent.
Labour government. It was created by the previous national government by merging three separate departments into what became MB.
what I meant is the provisions set in place on all the extra bureaucratic procedures in the current, previous MBIE, with so many rules and regulations. Was it not developed by the Labour 6 years?
No, MB came as a government department in about 2011 or 12, and I do know one of the departments that was merged into it was WorkSafe New Zealand.
All right. So
it was. It happened. It was deemed a super ministry set up to save money.
Oh,
The problem is, it hasn't exactly done it. I do know in MB, another thing they also do is visa applications for work permit holders, business visas, residencies.
I think
they are, because I know a former boss of mine. Her job is to do business visa applications at MB in the process of going through that before sending it off to Immigration New Zealand, where an immigration officer goes yes or no.
Right.
Yeah, no, the MB does do a lot of things in there, MB has been around for quite a number of years. I think Stephen Joyce might have been the first minister, but I'm not 100% certain.
Right. So, I mean, in the sense that I think collapsing merging so many disparate and diverse areas, immigration, visas, business, you name it, into one large gargantuan department may have not seen any real positives, isn't it? Because it becomes a bloated bureaucracy. So maybe they should devolve into separate, efficiently run like Luxembourg.
Yeah, but it's what it is. What is the replacement plan? Is the big question. I mean, you can devolve it. You can devolve an organisation down, but you've got to have a replacement plan. Like, I know there are people out there who want to see MSD shut down because they're a bad government department. But until you have a replacement plan in place, you need to actually sometimes have to keep them there, especially when they've got some very vital functions in society. And MB is one that does provide a lot of vital functions. In order to say devolve MB, it possibly could take 2 terms to actually go for a proper process to devolve MB. It wouldn't be something you could do on overnight. I do know the IRD new computer system they had, that got started, the $1 billion upgrade on the IRD's infrastructure started under the then Minister of Revenue, Peter Dunn. And I mean, this was back in 2012, the starting process of it. The transition part didn't start till 2016, and it took until 2022 before it finished.
I think they should make it into maybe 2 or 3 separate entities, because they are kind of not really like interlinked or synchronized. It's something like climate and environment is kind of synchronized.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things.
Environment is like, so maybe if they had a smaller, more efficiently run, departments focused on business, environment, and innovations.
We're going to move on to the next segment of the arms.